Let me turn on my mic. So it's now time to begin our Policy Advisory Committee. I believe we have a quorum. We're about to take roll and verify that. So I'll begin with on the roster as the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority has it, myself, and I'm here, obviously, Renee Westalusk.
Present.
Wes Katzenstein, and he is not going to be here tonight. Lyle Fisher.
Here.
Judy Decker.
Here.
Camille Anderson.
Here.
Tim Carroll.
Here.
Regina Troglin.
Here.
Don Zadiba.
Present.
And Tom Bukowskis.
Here.
John Kersey.
Present.
And Lorelei Oviatt is not online, so she's not here. So with that, we have a quorum. Let's now move to item number 2, Pledge of Allegiance. And please follow after me, face the flag and follow after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And for those that are so inclined, I'd offer a moment of silence for the members of the exploration submarine at the Titanic today. And if you haven't heard the announcement, it imploded, and they were all lost. Thank you. Okay, with that, we have open public comment, time reserved for public to address the committee about matters that are not on the regular agenda. Do we have any public comment within the room? I don't see any, and it's good to see we have, we gained a member of the public last meeting, and we now have a third, so that's good to see. Do we have any online input? So seeing none, we'll move to item number 4, approval of the minutes of the April PAC meeting that were sent out to you all. Do we have any comments or a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I never received them.
I don't believe I did either. I did not see any in my email, and I have looked.
I didn't receive them either.
Wow, I did them earlier than I normally do. They are essentially the PAC report from last time, adjusted to say minutes instead of report, and the dates and times corrected. But if we want to, we can table it if anybody's uncomfortable until the next meeting.
I am
You are? You are what?
uncomfortable.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so they are labeled the report that was given at the May 10th meeting of the Groundwater Authority?
Yes.
Okay. I thought that might be it, but I didn't email you.
As when I started doing the minutes, it has been the standard that the minutes are the report. I do the report such that it contains the reference material to give my report at the official GA meeting, and it serves as the basis with the corrections and times, et cetera, and what the voting results of each thing are, each issue or each item modified very slightly. So with that, we'll table that till next time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I request that you reverse the order of the items we're going to discuss this evening.
Yeah, and I did them in that order for a reason.
Well,
and it
I'm
was,
requesting it for a reason, actually.
we can do that. I expected we were going to have difficulty getting to closure on the second item, and the first one would be very simple because it essentially references a statement that was the top-level statement in the PAC report that represented what we had agreed to at the end of the meeting.
We did not agree to that at the end of the meeting. That is why I want
Okay.
to review the minutes.
Any other inputs? So do we want to change the agenda items, the order of the agenda items, or not?
I'll make a motion that we change the agenda item.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to swap the agenda items.
I would second
Number
that.
5, A and B.
Yes, change B.
And we have a second. Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. We have seconded. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Let's do a voice on that, or let's say again, aye.
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 Opposed? Nay. Okay, we have close to a unanimous vote.
To the rest of the committee, I say thank you.
And with that, we have, we're on item 5B. Review the ad hoc subcommittee recommendation regarding fair and reasonable expectations for documentation on the demonstration of well maintenance under the shallow well program and develop the full PAC recommendation. And it was split into 3 tasks that were summarized at the end of the meeting and copied in the PAC report. Number 1, what is a reasonable and fair expectation for the documentation by a well owner considering both pre and post SIGMA timeframes? Number 2, recommendations for communication and engagement opportunities that might be needed, potentially including those that may not be within the GA authority, but the GA may be able to influence parent, such as upon property sale with a well, what the potential disclosure and or documentation requirements might be, and with a question mark. And number 3, recommended terms required for clarified definition and any other adjustments to the shallow well mitigation program suggested by the tasking. And with that, we have the committee, and I understand what Judy provided a report to us all. And so, per our usual custom, I'll let and Judy, are you going to report out the results of the committee?
Yes, I got picked by default as chairperson.
Sometimes that's the case.
Yes.
So we'll let Judy present the
I even
summary.
provided them cookies to try to bribe them away from doing that, but it didn't work. But they did eat the cookies. Getting serious, the committee met 2 times, as well as many email interfaces with one another. The committee was myself, Lyle Fisher, Wes Katzenstein, and as technical advisor, TAC committee individual Don Decker. We did not discuss C&E engagement because none of us recalled that item. What we did was discuss a way of simplifying and reorganizing the well mitigation policy and the well mitigation report form. And as I recall, Renee had some negative comments about that report form earlier, and we took those to heart, I believe. I sent it out via April yesterday. I hope that you all had an opportunity to read it. It has a cover letter that goes with the report that is sort of a summary of the report. And forgive me for my failing eyesight. I'm sorry the report was as late as it was, but one of our committee members came up with some salient points at a late date that were added into this report. What the report states is that both well failure and shallow well need to be clearly defined. and we recommend that shallow well be defined as a de minimis well. The state defines a de minimis well as one that uses less than 2 acre-feet annually. And so that is something that can be put into any report for a GA because in fact it is a statement from the State Department of Water Resources, I imagine. If one uses the definition of a de minimis well as a shallow well, then a lot of the things that are in the policy and especially in the report form will go away because as explained in the technical addendum, there is a technical definition of and method for drilling a de minimis well and equipping the well with casing and perforations. And a de minimis well is constructed so that it can't pump a lot of water. It usually has a 1 to about a 5 horsepower pump and motor in it. So it is definitely limited. Some of the other points that we made, and Lyle, you can help me out if I skip stuff. We
Well,
recommend,
maintenance was a
in
big deal.
particular, we recommend that a separate policy be created for well systems that are greater than 4. Usually a well that's drilled that has 4 connections is still considered a de minimis well. And there, probably 90% of the wells in this valley are de minimis wells. Whereas larger wells to serve many people they're bigger. They aren't de minimis. They pump much more than 2 acre-feet annually. They involve well systems. They involve legal documentation. And this is something that the PAC should not address. It is something for the legal personnel involved in the GA to come up with a policy for I call them community wells. Some of them are mutuals, some of them are called something else, and I don't know what the something else might be, so I just call them community wells with quotes around it. But we had quite a discussion about that, and the decision was that it was better to be a separate policy. The other important thing that I think we just decided upon was there are wells that have been mitigated by either deepening the existing well or drilling a new well because of a decline in water level. And many of these happened before the GA, but some of them happened during the formation of the GA. The people were not involved with the GA, have not come to the GA, but they need to be discovered and they need to be tracked so that they can be considered in looking at the decline of the water levels in this valley. We felt that as a goal, if the PAC accepts this document and passes it on to the GA, or a revised document and was passed on to the GA, that an appropriate time to deal with this would be to put it in the big review that's coming in 2025. And the way we dealt with the report form is, first of all, if the basis is a de minimis well, many of the items that are requested in the report form will go away, including well maintenance. De minimis wells are only maintained when something occurs with the well and it stops working, like it could be a lowering of the groundwater level. It could also be that the motor failed or the pump failed and it must be pulled. When a well is pulled, that refers, I'm offering this up to people who might not have any experience with a well. When a well is pulled, usually a well driller comes in and he pulls the assembly out of the well casing. It will be a pump and a motor, the drop pipe which holds the pump and the motor, and the electrical wiring that is attached to it that makes the motor go. At that time, the well is inspected. The well driller will say, "Oh, heck, your motor burned out. You need a new pump and motor." Or he'll say, "We need to measure this well." It's usually done at that time because the well casing is small. It's not very big, 6 inches, I believe. And the well is measured to see how much standing water is in it. If there's little standing water, then perhaps the motor burned out because of that issue. So we are recommending that the report form, besides having name and address and all that minutia, have the well driller's report, the history of the well, and the maintenance records of that well. And we state quite clearly in our report that it is the well owner's responsibility to keep that information and to know that information. And I realize that some people wanted to have some sort of thing in about transfer of property to somebody else, but that is not an issue for the PAC. That is an issue to bring up with the Board of Realtors, and it is actually a responsibility of the person buying that piece of property. When you buy a house in Ridgecrest and you're on the water district system, you want to know whether the electrical wiring in your house is connected, and have it inspected or inspect it yourself before you buy it. So this is something that comes with the territory of owning a piece of property with a well on it. It's your responsibility. Let's see. The technical addendum that was prepared by Don has many things in it that will help explain wells, well construction, well failure. A chief reference that he used, which you all can acquire if you so desire, is a handbook on groundwater and wells, and explains all kinds of wells, how they're built, what size pump and motor should be used, and what size casing, where the well perforations should be placed, and on and on. And Lyle, do you have anything you think?
Yeah, you're pretty well covering it. It's just one of the things we did talk a lot about was this well maintenance thing, is that well maintenance for a domestic well it's not applicable. I'm sorry. You do maintenance when the thing stops working. That's the way it works. When your pump fails, and let's see, I think on my 40-year-old well, I'm on my fourth pump. Fourth or fifth, I kind of lost track. Pressure tanks, yeah, I'm on about the fifth pressure tank. So, but that is the way you don't do maintenance until you need it, and those are all responsibility of the well owner, not the GA. The problem, of course, we have here is the groundwater's going down continually. Only goes down, that's why we call it critical overdraft. Goes down only, never comes up, at least not in my well it doesn't. So that's, those are the only, in the deteriorating water quality, well, I'm in a good area, and my quality hasn't degraded to my knowledge. It didn't seem to, but it probably is. It will. But the level is definitely going down. And those are the only two factors that should affect whether the GA is going to pay for fixing my well or not maintenance on the well. It's unrelated, unrelated entirely. So, but anyhow,
Right.
that was my thing.
And when we had our meeting, we talked about the two documents from number 4 in the GSP, the shallow well policy and the form, which has a horrendously long title. But both of them, right up front, state the issue is decline in water quality and decline in water levels. Now, I did not address water quality. I did in my report. Water quality is it's a complex issue, and it's something that you can't easily describe or have in detail in a policy, because different areas of this valley have different water quality. As Lyle just mentioned, he's in a good water area, but some areas of the valley up along Brown Road, just west of the fence, their water quality is quite poor. It's high in total dissolved solids. So if someone, and this should go in the report form, if someone is having a water quality problem, they need to take water samples, take them to a registered laboratory, have them tested. But more than once needs to be done, I believe, to see what's going on over time. There also have been issues with private wells and septic systems. So that certainly can be an issue with water well quality. I recall, and some of you have lived here a long time can remember, there used to be a trailer park on the south side of Bowman Road, east of where Walmart is now, and it was always being shut down by the health department because that had that problem I just mentioned about well water and septic systems. So water quality, while it is an issue, it is complicated. Our recommendation is that also the policy and the report form need to mention, which has come up before, video, taking a video of the well after the pump and motor is pulled so you can inspect the well casing. In some areas of the valley, as is reported in the technical report, the constituents in the water are high in iron and manganese, as well as, if you don't know, TDS stands for total dissolved solids. The state has maximum levels of the constituents that are in well water, and it's easy to come across, get a hold of those from the state. And Don, do you want to say anything about your technical part that you offered up?
Good evening. Am I on?
Yep.
There is a section in my technical report on water quality, and it specifically mentions the items that Judy just went through. It is very important, and it does mention the importance of keeping track of your well water if you're pushing the limits that the health department recommends for a number of constituents. And we do indeed have wells that are pushing those limits. And the measurement is something that a laboratory would do. You can't do it yourself. And you would ordinarily go through probably the water district and use their continuous delivery and receipt of records. So there is a way to do it that's actually pretty simple from the well owner's standpoint.
Can you repeat that, Don? It's, for
Starting
example,
with-
it might be something that we would ask well owners documentation for them to provide. That's what I heard, and I just want to clarify if did the committee agree the subcommittee agree that that would be part of your recommendation?
If there's a water quality issue.
Yeah, the water quality is, the county has some maximum contaminant level numbers that if your well doesn't meet those requirements, you get a warning, but you do not get a prohibition on using your well water. That's up to you. Most of the wells, if they have a MCL issue, it's not far from the maximum contaminant level. Some people have actually do have wells with high iron and manganese, and after drinking that water for half of a lifetime, are now sick with recognized basically iron overload. It's a fairly serious illness also. So there are some wells on the west side of the valley that do have high iron. Actually not very far from the Water District Southwest well field. So the other area that I think I should spend a little time on is the issue of maintenance, because it was brought up so many times as if it was a deficiency that many people who had well reports were not displaying any maintenance. For the shallow de minimis well, the maintenance that's done, as both Judy and Lyle mentioned, is simply the replacement of pump and motor, or maybe even a drop pipe, as part of an ordinary well swap out. That's the maintenance that's done. There's nothing else that is commonly done. There's no scrubbing of perforations because no scrubbing is necessary. And the idea that we should encourage a video examination of the well is actually not very hard. Virtually all of the well drillers, including Garrison, have a simple rig that can be lowered. It's not an expensive thing because you're not examining the casing every little millimeter of its length and around the circumference. You're looking mostly at the perforations, and it's the basis, really. If you think you're going to end up with an application to the GA for mitigation, the video is the basis for that, along with some other measurements like depth to water. It's the thing that would really give the GA the data that is otherwise missing. And it should be done virtually on every well. That includes the de minimis wells. So I think that's pretty much what I should say. In the technical report, I provide some guidelines that will cover about 99% of the de minimis wells that have been drilled here. The characteristics of the well, casing size, depth, the depth of the length of the casing, perforations, I mean, that are at the bottom of the casing, and the size of the pump and motor. Those are all in the technical report. So what you have in the technical report is a package that includes all of the major factors that are important in evaluating a well to determine whether it's a de minimis well and whether or not it has failed as a result of water decline. It's all in the technical report. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And for clarity in the audience, the Groundwater Authority authorized the PAC to have a supplemental member of the TAC as a part of the subcommittee, and that's what Don is speaking of, his contribution as well as to the discussions from the policy standpoint with regards to this issue.
Yes,
I
thank
would
you.
like to add that collectively, I think all of us spent about 70 hours on this document, and I'm sorry I forgot to put the word draft on it, but it was my fault. I did forget the word draft.
I think we all understood that.
Well, I'm just emphasizing it.
Gotcha, Judy. Renee, you had a question?
Yeah, I have some questions for Don. Okay, when you say about replacing the pump and motor, it's only when it fails, correct?
Ordinarily, that would be the case.
Okay. And then what about the pressure tanks? Isn't that part of maintenance too? Those can fail too.
Yes, but that's a topside thing, and it's completely 100% on the owner's side. There's no way the GA is going to replace any of that hardware.
And then when you talk about video of the well, are you talking about having someone camera-ing the well?
Yes,
Okay. I just want to know, how often does that have to be done?
you would do it when you pull pump and motor if you have any questions about what is actually happening in your well. And if you think that you're going to apply for a mitigation from the GA, you absolutely need to do it. And the time to do it is when the casing is open.
How expensive is camera-ing the well?
It's a few $100s with Garrison. Depends on how deep the well is.
Is there anything, as far as maintenance, that a shallow well owner should be doing annually? Should they be doing their own checkup? Because there's been lists put on the DWR website that give all these like little guidelines for shallow well owners. They have a checklist, annual checklist. Is there anything that you think should be done annually?
Well, there are some things that can be done that can verify the health of the pump and motor. If you have a water meter where you're measuring gallons of water and you have a running time meter on your controller, you can calculate quite easily, for example, over a period of a month, maybe you do this once a month, you can calculate the gallons per hour that the system is capable of delivering. And it will start at some nominal amount. You can actually look it up in the handbooks. But as the pump seals slowly deteriorate, the gallons per hour will decrease because some of the water is bypassing the actual path in the pump. And at some point, you should replace the pump and usually the motor at the same time because it simply failed from an efficiency standpoint. You're spending money on electricity that isn't resulting in water delivered. And that's a simple enough thing to do. Water meter and a running time meter is $20.
Okay, what about the TDS? How often should that be taken or sampled?
Most private well owners measure TDS by the taste of their water, and it's not changing very fast, and you just simply don't. If you have a TDS meter, which today you can buy one for a few dollars, like $20, you can put it in your pocket. That's how small it is. And they're calibratable, and you can use it with some confidence. So, you know, if you have one, you could measure once in a while, but nothing is ordinarily is going to happen with any frequency.
Do you think the TDS should be one of the criteria by which, or maybe the sole criteria by which the GA bases whether they should mitigate a well?
No.
I mean, what out of these records that were mentioned should be the basis by whether the GA should mitigate a well?
The well failure that we're talking about is a well that fails as a result of declining water levels or water quality. But the water quality aspect is something that virtually isn't a problem here. There are wells that are high in TDS, all right, but they're not really changing very much. They are drilled that way, and that's what they are now. So what we're really looking at is the issue of declining water levels and its effect on the well. When the pump is lowered in the well, every time the pump and motor is replaced, typically at least a half a length, that is 10 feet, of drop pipe is added. Sometimes it's a whole length. It depends on how long it's been since the pump and motor were replaced. But the pump and motor, just the round robin, is $1,500. So you're not going to do that just for the heck of it. And so when you have it out, you're going to make changes like add some drop pipe. And at some point, you're going to have the intake of the pump actually located in the perforation zone of the well. And depending on the formation that's outboard of the perforations, the sand and gravel and so on, you can have a situation where the pump is sucking in coarser material, and it will clog the pump or ultimately wear it out. In our well that we have right now, we are in the perforation, and it's pulling in some interesting mineralogy. It's pulling in some magnetite, it's magnetic. It's also pulling in little particles of gold. So we're in the gold business, except that there isn't really enough to worry about. The failure will occur, you know, it starts when the intake is in the perforations of the well. As you go deeper, it won't necessarily get worse, but it might well. It depends on the location and what sands and gravels are in the in the formation just outboard of the pump. So the other thing, of course, ultimately, the failure is if the pump is lowered multiple times, you'll finally be at the point where it can't go any further. And when the water level drops down to the point where it exposes the intake, you are absolutely done. So there's a warning to you, that is, when you're in the perforation zone, you know, your failure is coming. And it might actually happen right there, as Lyle experienced with his well, and he can tell you about that. It can be fairly benign, like ours is happening right now, but it also can be dramatically catastrophic. You want to say something, Lyle, about your?
No, yeah, I will.
Shouldn't even talk about it.
Let's see. I had a submersible pump fail, And it had only been in the ground, down the well, like 3 years. Pulled it again, and the pump is plugged with nice particles of rust. And I says, how can this be? Until I checked my drilling log, checked where the pump had been, and went, excuse me, oh my God. I'm about 6 feet into the perforations, and what I am seeing that plugged this pump are particles of rust from my steel casing. So that means I am in trouble. So that's when I got Jerry Boach to come up and deepen it, and then recase the whole thing. And that, of course, is wrought with all kinds of problems, and we got lucky and it worked. So I am good for a while yet, but anyhow, that's the sign though. And the other thing, Don, you talked. Yeah, I don't have water meter or not. Yeah, I don't have a water meter installed. I have one, of course, but I don't have it installed. You can watch the current draw of your submersible pump, but the motor is pulling. All your well drillers and service people know what that current should be. And when that current starts going up, that means your pump is drawing more or pumping longer. That's the other thing is, and they start plugging up with what, then it starts drawing more current when it runs, and it runs too long, then that's what you notice. And I had another point and I just lost it. A little senior moment here. Yeah, anyhow.
I have a question regarding how important it is to have the maintenance records. Whether to judge a well should be qualify for mitigation funds if the groundwater levels you can prove that are lowering.
Well, you have to look carefully at what the groundwater levels are actually doing. Virtually every well in this valley is, in fact, going down. The Heritage Village well was actually pretty stable because there's no well anywhere near it. But the wells that are higher water quality further west are dropping 1.5 feet or more per year. And it's never ending. So that's your first clue. And then the next clue is, well, where is the pump and motor? How much life do we have left? There's no question the well will ultimately fail. But the question is when? Is it at that point now, or is it 10 years from now? And that's why you have to look at is the intake of the pump in the perforations, and is it pulling substantial sand and gravel? If it is, that can be a failure right now. So that's how you determine that. In the maintenance, let me repeat it again. For the shallow de minimis well, which is what we're proposing we concentrate on here, we're going to get 90+% of the wells in the valley in that description. So the wells that don't match that, which are much harder to deal with, are a different matter entirely because they involve legal aspects of LLCs and so on. So the well failure is easy enough to analyze. The maintenance for the de minimis well is absolutely the minimum of replacing pump and motor and adding drop pipe. That's what you do. There is no scrubbing of casing.
I monitor my submersible pump in a very non-technical manner. I press my ear up against my big 4,100 gallon tank and listen to it. You can hear it, although it's further down there and with a bunch of plastic pipe now, I don't hear it too well, but I can hear it. I can hear it when it's running. And yeah, you can tell. You hear the clatter of the check valves, means it's pumping water, and you can see what it sounds like. So, and yeah, and when it goes starting to go bad, oh yeah, you can hear that too. So,
Don, from the discussion, I was a kid when we had a well, and that was the last time, and I didn't care about this stuff back then, so I'm not knowledgeable about it at all. Does a report, a driller's report, include all the applicable information? And I'm assuming there's two well drillers' reports that would be relevant to this discussion. It would be the original driller's report, and that would state the perforation level, the water level, where the pump is, distance to water, and depth of well.
That's
and some
exactly
other
how I
things.
discovered my problem. Okay.
And then the subsequent one that is, I think it's not explicitly stated, but it's implied in the current form and the policy is, a current, upon failure, or you think it's a failure due to declining water level or water quality, is that included in the well driller's report? All those things would again be included in a well driller's report for documenting the failure.
The report you're talking about, the second report, is a maintenance report, and it's the replacement of a pump and motor that it's not necessarily done by a well driller. It's done by a well maintenance technician, right? So he shows up with a pickup with a boom, and you can pull the parts of your well out that are of importance, and he will measure depth to water, and he knows where the pump was located because you have the lengths of drop pipe laying right there. You can count them out 20 feet at a time, or 21 if it's galvanized. And so you have depth to water, and you can easily determine where the pump intake is. And if you've done this more than once, you know where it was 15 years ago or however long ago it was that you previously pulled it out. If it's the very first time after drilling, well, then you don't have much history. You have the original well condition, and now you have, whatever it is now. Is that helping you?
Yeah, it does, because I have property in Kern County on the western side of the valley, but I hadn't drilled a well yet. And so I'm thinking if I were going to apply, if I had gotten to that point and my well had gone dry or the quality was bad, what documentation would I be expected to present and for the board to consider? And from what I've read in the committee report and gleaned from the more detailed conversations and discussion that each of you have had around this, is I should have, the documentation I should have is largely the original well driller's report and a well maintenance assessment to compare that against. And other than that well maintenance report, in between maintenance and documentation of that is not necessarily something that would impact the decision, nor would we expect, should the GA expect a well owner to have. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right,
Okay.
and on the well owner's part, a way to clarify it is, in fact, to have a video log done of their well. And that is particularly important as far as a water quality problem, because the constituents mentioned manganese, iron, and there's some other, they will be on the sides of the well casing and perhaps eating away at the well perforations, and that would be clearly seen by a video log.
Okay, and now with regards to the documentation potentially that the groundwater authority might request from a homeowner or well owner would be the water quality, any water quality documentation that verifies to the groundwater authority the substandard, the water condition that originally had, and then a change to that water condition that made it unsuitable. Is that correct?
Yes, but I didn't have a water quality in mind.
Right.
No,
Never.
but there are two things, we're looking
But-
for two, there are two things that can require the groundwater authority to be responsible for some level of mitigation. One of them's level and the other one's quality.
But I'd like to point out, and we pointed it out in our documentation that we've presented to you, the water quality issue is complicated because there are areas of the valley that have and have always had a poor or poorer water quality. And I was going to probably bring it up in your next item, but I've mentioned to you before that I was on the water board off and on for a long time. Well, before I was even on the water board, I attended their meetings, and I recall about at least 40 years ago going to a meeting where they were having a public hearing with the people that lived in, I don't know how long you've lived here, but some of you have lived here and grew up here and so on. You might remember the HLM development, which it was 3 guys. I only know who the one was. It was John Lamb, the L in HLM. They bought a large parcel of land or put parcels of land together in San Bernardino County, east of county line, subdivided them into 2.5-acre parcels and put in a community water system. It was relatively expensive compared to some of the other developments in town at the time. It filled up mostly with people who put in a mobile home. These are people that liked horses, so they had horses on their 2.5 acres. Well, they didn't live there very long, maybe 3 or 4 years, and the state said their water was too high in arsenic. And it was high in other constituents too. And look at where it is. It's at the tail end of any recharge that might be coming from the Sierras, way over there in Orange County, in San Bernardino County. They requested to join the water district. The water district agreed. They formed an assessment district, and they had to pay for the infrastructure to connect their properties to the water district. The water district did, however, put in 2 new wells to help accommodate these people because they could not use their well. It was contaminated with poor quality water. And that's when the district put in wells 12 and 13. 12 is now kaput. I think it was high in arsenic also. It's the well that was at the corner of Jack's Ranch and Ridgecrest Boulevard. But I bring that up to point out to you, there are areas in this valley that have always had poor quality water. You think about it, you think about the history of the valley, the folks that came here in the good old days, they wanted to farm. So they went where the water was shallow and where the land was flat, which was in fact the area surrounding just west and just south of China Lake. That water was of poor quality. They managed to grow things, and the water was indeed shallow, but the water was not of high quality. So that's the way it is in a desert basin.
So as the groundwater authority that receives a request for mitigation based on declining water quality, what documentation should I reasonably expect a well owner to have? Is the original driller responsible for documenting the water quality? For example, in that original drill report?
No. He's not.
Okay, but would it be reasonable at the very top level for the groundwater authority to request that maintenance report that would also be covering the going dry issue or any other documentation that indicates it's now of poor quality. So what would I, if I were even in the situation that Judy mentioned, what would I be expected to present to the Groundwater Authority for them to pay out any money?
A set of water analyses starting from the very beginning and basically observing the decline in water quality.
How much of that is reasonable to expect from a shallow well owner?
In a well that has poor water, it's expected because the people are going to be complaining right from the get-go.
Yeah, and it seems to me this is the kind of information we need to advise
David?
the authority.
This is mentioned in the report.
Can I bring up something
Yes.
here? So we've definitely talked about what's reasonable for a well owner to have, the well driller's report, the maintenance report. What I'm going to suggest here is that, and as Don mentioned, people might have these things, they might not. We could perhaps move the policy in a direction that the more that the well owner can produce and basically prove their own case, the more they may be eligible for in the mitigation funds. That, if you can't produce anything but your most recent report, you never did any monitoring of water quality, you don't have the original well driller's report or any, 2 points of data to show some rate of decline, maybe you're only eligible for 50% mitigation funds or none because we can't even prove that, how fast your decline was. And so I just wanted to bring that in because part of Julie Lyles and Wes's report also mentions, a proration. That 75% of the factor should be the decline. And then 15% would be the maintenance and 10% would be the age of the well. And that, so basically nobody would ever expect to get 100% replacement value from the GA. And what I'm suggesting here is perhaps that we move the policy into the more that the well owner has, to provide the GA to prove their case, the more they would be eligible for. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, that's precisely
That-
where I was
The
headed.
original well driller's log, though, is filed with the county, and it is there.
I would like to point out that-
My special case on that was why no one could ever connect the dots. Who was that from Stetson? Because Stetson has the original one. They got it from the county. My name is there, but my address is an address on base that no longer even exists. It is barren desert. And so they couldn't cross it to anything. But that's my original well driller's log. And I realized that was.
And that would be maintained regardless of sale of
Supposed to.
land. That is
That's right.
that is
It's
a
still
piece
there.
of documentation that might be required, but not required of the current well owner to present. Only the current maintenance record and/or quality record. And Renee, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have two things. One, I'm looking for a checklist so that the GA can educate the well owners, the shallow well owners, because right now, the way it's set up, there's these forms you can fill out and try to get mitigation funds, but until you go to those forms and try to fill them out, you don't know what's required.
I'd like to
So-
point out a few things.
Yeah.
As far as water quality, Tom, I refer you to the first full paragraph on page 3. And at the bottom of the report, Renee, it says, well, we called it an outline form. We thought the report form should be in a form of an outline, but it would be a checklist. And yes, all that unnecessary verbiage needs to be removed. And you can start with the title of the document. But we didn't clearly discuss water quality because we aren't water chemists. But we do say two things. You need to get some lab tests, water quality tests from a lab, and it would be a good idea to have it videoed if you want the GA board to mitigate.
Okay, I have a question regarding the cameraing or the video of the well. Is that going to show the lowering?
No, well, yes,
Of the
you
water?
will, yes, you will be able to see the water level clear as you can measure it with a tape. I don't understand why you're so concerned about the camera. That's just an ordinary thing that you would do to inspect any mechanical thing carefully to understand why it's having problems.
But I'm wondering, how do you prove the lowering of the groundwater levels? Don't you have to constantly have the well cameraed every so many years?
No. You measure anytime the well is pulled, anytime the well was open, like in the very beginning, and then if it's just a one-time deal, 15 years later it's pulled, you're going to measure depth to water again with a measuring wire or tape or the camera, and you can compare the two measurements. If it's going down, it's going down.
In videoing it for water quality is going to show the residue that is down there in the water, and it's going to show, as is mentioned in the technical part of this report, that certain constituents eat the casing. They enlarge the perforations so that additional sands and gravels can enter that weren't there before. I believe, but I'm not sure, was a heritage well videoed? Renee?
They were supposed to check into it, and they haven't gotten back.
Well, but you have the pump and motor in it now, you're using it.
They did put a new pump in, so I assume they did camera
So
it.
they won't do that until they pull it again. Pulling a well is expensive.
Oh, I have a couple questions. My first comment is, I thought you guys did a great job as far as the report itself goes. I understood it. It was well-written. I thought that it covered what you guys wanted to cover. But my question has to do with, so you've written this report. What is it that you would like for us to do with it? Mainly because, do you want to use it as a basis for recommending to the groundwater authority that we rewrite, or they rewrite the shallow well mitigation
Yes.
Absolutely.
policy?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And also redo the form that they want
Yes.
people to
Absolutely.
submit?
Absolutely.
Yes. What
Okay.
we would like, I believe, is for the PAC committee to approve this. If it's approved, we would like it to go forward to the GA board at the next GA meeting.
To be a basis for rewriting the shallow well mitigation?
Yes.
Right, and to include the recommendations that we have, or if you have others, to put them in there. Certainly, it was made very apparent that the form in filling it out was way too complicated. And that's why we based it on a de minimis well, because the de minimis well is the simplest well that a well driller drills, I believe.
I completely agree that it should be separated as a de minimis well and as a municipal or community or whatever, just because.
Just because, that's
Well,
enough.
I was going to say, just because you're right. I think the de minimis wells are much simpler. It's easier to decide what the failure may or may not be, because basically you're not going to be doing anything with your well unless you have a failure.
Right.
Whereas municipal wells, you have a lot more complications involved.
Right, and municipal wells, we didn't discuss municipal wells at all. We did talk
Community.
briefly about mutuals.
Right, sorry.
That's
Wrong terminology.
That's okay. I want to make sure other people understand that. We did not deal at all with public water systems. We felt that mutuals, community wells, I don't know what they call them themselves. They have different names. They fall under a different category. Most of them have been created legally, so there's legal documentation that goes along with them. And with most of them, the experiences we have learned of, it's not a well problem so much as it is a distribution problem. And really, with a lot of them, the problem is not that either. The problem is getting the participants. They're supposed to be
To agree. Sure.
putting money in annually to have a fund for repairs and maintenance and well pulling and all that stuff.
So for the purposes of this document that you've provided to us, in my opinion, it probably needs to be divided into two sections. The first part would be, do we agree that we want to focus on the de minimis wells separate from the other ones as you've just described? And also, if that's the case, do we want to agree to approve this documentation to give to the GA to guide them in changing the shallow well? Is that a fair summation, that there's kind of two different things for us to consider?
Well, I guess I think Lyle and Wes and Don thought we were creating this document for the GA.
Yes.
So I don't know why you would want to separate it.
I don't want to separate it. I want to separate the discussion. As far as I'm concerned, there's two discussion items. One is, do we all agree that we would prefer to focus on de minimis wells for this particular thing? And then the second would be, do we agree to adopt the documentation as a whole to give to the GA?
I'd say
Because
sure.
we've been
I-
focused an awful lot on the details of exactly what you might want if your well fails.
Yeah. Well, that
but
seems
we
to be
haven't-
the problem. That seemed to have been the problem anyhow. It's not defined. In fact, the shallow well thing was not defined. That's why we
Correct.
threw in the de minimis, because that defines what we're talking about. the
And
kind of
I
well.
agree with you. I just want some clarity to move forward as opposed to discussing the minutia of exactly how we're going to video log our wells.
Yeah,
I
okay.
agree.
I agree with that, too.
Regina had
I had
a question.
Couple of questions, and Camille does make a point. So more than likely, I'll have to ask Dawn offline, because I had to deal with well life and stuff like that, because I'm not really clear on some of that, because it's mentioned a couple of times, both in the breakdown on page 3, and then in your, it's on page 5 as well, regarding well life and how that would really impact if somebody were to get funds, because it's in your breakdown. I don't know how that would work, because I'm not familiar with it. So I'll ask Dawn that question offline so I can get a more detailed answer. But, based on some of the discussion, I know we've had this issue kind of in the past where we do get into minutia during the meetings and stuff. If I understood Camille correctly, if we were to, let's say, because, Renee brought up a couple of things, I have additional questions with the document itself, just the details. Is that something that would be done later on, getting into some of the meat of it, or just leaving it as is and then going?
I'm sorry. In my opinion, if you have a subcommittee that's going to go into the great, humongous details of every little thing, and they've come out with a product, I would prefer not necessarily to go over exactly the same ground that they've all gone over during their, 70 hours? Is that what you said?
Thank you.
Of study in order to put this together. However, obviously, if the group has some huge technical questions, then I don't think you're necessarily going to solve them in a 2 or 3 hour PAC meeting. Maybe maybe we can go back and look at all the technical references and have, people meet as another subcommittee to decide exactly what they want to do. It just seems to me like you're going over the same ground with what the subcommittee has already discussed.
Historically, the PAC has commissioned several subcommittees, and they are leading to a formal committee recommendation by the whole board. And in many cases, we have sent the committees back with information needed to be amplified, that members have inputs, other things to consider, some things eliminated, and some things downright changed based on the vote of the whole PAC. And so the purpose of a subcommittee is to inform the PAC before we form a cogent set of clear recommendations that the Groundwater Authority would take action on. And that's what we've done in the past, and I think we're at that stage currently, because there's at least 4 of us that found great information in the report. It's very complete with some additional information that we drew out in the discussions here, but it isn't clear that we answered the tasking with regards to what documentation would you expect and would a shallow well owner expect? And I agree there's 2 sets of them. I agree with that whole conversation. And so perhaps if we were to ask the committee to go back and having these things in mind and somewhat of the original tasking that was summarized in the PAC report and actually at the end of the last PAC meeting, those 3 things. Clearly, what are the reasonable and fair expectation for documentation by a well owner considering both pre and post-COVID timeframes? And what I'm hearing is from the Groundwater Authority, we'd want an original well drillers report, but that's not what's needed from the well owner, because that's maintained in the county records. But we would expect, with regards to the 2 reasons for failure, the chronic lowering of the water table and chronic lowering of the quality, at the very minimum, we would expect a current well report, maintenance or otherwise, whatever you call it, regarding 2 issues. One, if their issue is it went dry, then documenting all the issues around that and perhaps recommending that they have a video portion of that. And the second one is, what documentation should we expect from a well owner regarding the current quality and really adding to their database regarding the decline in water quality due to the pumping in the basin, any past evidence they had. And I agree, Tom, that this should probably be divided into 2 sections. And I wouldn't say we need a shallow well. We need 2 sections of the shallow well mitigation to say, number 1, which one do you qualify for? If you're a de minimis user, go to this section and look at the policy. If you're some form of collective, and I'll use that word to cover all the rest of the contingencies, whatever their name they're known by, go to this section. This might be what's required of you. And put that out front in clarity. And you might have some of the documentation as to why, which this report provides a lot of that. You might need those. And the second one is, it certainly historically is within the purview of the PAC to make recommendations formally for the C&E plan and informally for communication. And so if any of those things that we recommend is a new recommendation, perhaps the well driller's well maintenance report that documents the issues that I've just said. Should there be, a town hall meeting for that in small shallow well driller territory? Or should the PAC, not the PAC, should the Groundwater Authority, consider a mailing to those about, hey, here's, this is happening. There's 22 wells that may go, at least 22 wells, according to the data analysis, that might go dry, and that doesn't even talk about quality. You may want to be prepared to have the documentation if you are one of those, and so that's the communication
Wait a
part
minute.
of it. And the third,
Wait a minute. You're kind of getting off track.
I'm following the tasking.
Wait. Okay, I'm trying to take notes. What I'm hearing from some of you is you would like this committee that wrote this report to go back and add to it an outline of what a de minimis well owner would need to bring forth to apply for mitigation, and that we want that list to be put on the report form. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we want to make that recommendation. It's more specific than I would propose to say put it on the well report form. There may be some set of that we want. The idea is to answer the question of what's reasonable for the expectations of a well owner to receive mitigation. What's reasonable documentation for them to present to enable a higher payout for the mitigation under two circumstances. One is declining water level, and due to the declining water level in the basin over time. The second one is declining water level, water quality. Those are the two reasons that either a collective or a shallow well individual de minimis user might expect to receive some compensation. And if I were one, and I could be one since I own land, that was my ultimate intent, I want to know what kind of documentation I should keep, or if there was some, and if that wasn't kept pre-Sigma, that was the pre-Sigma, post-Sigma part of this, if that wasn't kept pre-Sigma, what should I ask for from a previous owner? That turns out not to be the case, since we don't have to worry about that original driller's report.
Everyone
Only if you can
should
locate it in the county.
acquire a copy, if they don't have it, of the original well driller's report for the well, because that is the starting point. That will tell you what the constituents that are found at different depths are. Are you drilling through 100 feet of solid clay? Are you drilling through sands and gravels? Whatever. It will also tell you the starting point of your water level. And when you have time to read this more carefully, you will see that the recommendation, it is in here not necessarily as a recommendation, but as a fact, is that well drillers want you to have 100 feet of standing water in a de minimis well. The recommendation is, in fact, that with the steeper water declines that some areas have, is go to 140 feet of standing water. If the water is dropping at a rate of 2 feet a year, that will theoretically give you 70 feet of life in your well.
And so our recommendation perhaps should be that well owners do acquire that.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly my point.
Yeah, that's what's in here.
But it's to at least four of us, it's not clear, and if I were the GA, I can't pick that out. I want to hear it spelled out. These are the documents.
So we'll write some of this in outline and list form for those who can't figure it out and have the explanation attached.
Okay.
I personally, I mean, sorry to interrupt. I know I'm probably stepping on some toes.
That's quite all right.
I'm with Dave. I mean, I understand the document. You guys put an immense amount of work into it. And I understand the basics of what I already know of background. But for me, it would be helpful to have kind of just a very quick, or I know it's not going to be quick, you know, an outline or table or something that just very clearly bullet points it and have the explanation, just like you were saying, Judy.
Well,
I think for me, that would be
that's the
very
last-
helpful.
That's the last statement in the report, that it should be an outline form. It wasn't, I guess I'll go ahead and say it. It wasn't really clear how detailed we should get. We didn't want to step on others' toes, so to speak, and hurt their feelings by recreating a form or policy for them.
We're only making the recommendations as we see them, and we don't have to put it in, this should be the form.
Okay.
We were asked by the GA to do this, to make, and there's two things we were asked to, there was really one thing we were asked to do is, what should be reasonable expectations for a shallow well owner to provide to the GA?
That's what's in here.
But
We'll put it in a list.
it's not clear to some of us people that couldn't understand that. And I believe it would have more force for the public and the groundwater authority members, including the staff, if it were absolutely clear and succinct. And that's a recommendation that this committee has made to the groundwater authority several times.
Well, that very thing is that step, we did not deliberately take it for the exact reasons that Judy just mentioned. The last form, the guidance in the form was done by Stetson. And it was done by someone who has no understanding of wells and well failure. It's a terrible document. So if we come in with something with enough detail to go forward with, it's going to hurt some feelings probably. That's why we did it.
And I understand that, and there's a way, I think, to do it without saying, this is the form, these are the recommendations that we think need to be clarified. And I would ask that are there any other inputs from PAC members that we haven't heard from yet, or those that want to amplify their point or make a different point?
I have one more comment, and it basically has to do with the C&E. And I just want to make sure, since there are not all that many well drillers and maintenance people in the valley, that we focus on them for information. If the GA is going to require certain information, that they need to communicate that to the people who are actually doing the maintenance, that, you know, this is one of the things that we would like to do. Do you provide that to your clients, you know, for a nominal fee or whatever? But just to educate them that these are the types of things that they may be requested to do because the groundwater authority would like to have this information.
We can do that.
I think that's an excellent point.
We are in regular contact with Garrison Drilling because Don and I go along for the ride, is keeping tabs on monitoring well in RVN, I guess it's called, the Rose Valley second well. So we see them often.
Tom, you're chomping at the bit.
Sure. So the document you guys produced definitely reflects your experience and your knowledge. What I was thinking for this board might be easier is to break it out into manageable chunks that can be debated and voted on if necessary, that this is, we agree this particular part should be brought forward as this kind of recommendation to the board, and because there are many different topics in this document, and I was just thinking that might be a way for the board to break it down and make those recommendations to the GA more
Are you
clear.
talking about the board or the PAC?
For the PAC to recommend to the board.
Is that something?
So I'd like to hold forth for a few minutes. Or
Absolutely,
A
Tim.
minute or two. We lost about a third of our audience. You know, Sam already trucks water to survive. So, you know, we're kind of talking about, you know, people stepping over the line of not being able to use their wells. There's a lot of people already can't use their wells. So, big picture suggestion, and this is off topic, but it's stimulated by the topic. I'd like to see the GA and the Navy get together and try to figure out how to mitigate existing too salty water to be. I should mention, we used to live in Goleta for about 10 years.
Can you get closer to the mic?
We used to live in Goleta for about 10 years, and we shared a well with two of our neighbors. Goleta being near the coast, it gets saltwater intrusion, so we had to have a reverse osmosis polishing station to give the water for the three residents. So, you know, that's something in the back of my mind. I think we got all this salt water. You know, there's probably relative quality, and, you know, if you have a big rainstorm like we just had, and we could put some of that rain into a saltwater area, that probably reduces the power it takes to, you know, we were kind of lucky being on the hill in Goleta because the intruded water, you know, was salty, but we could drop it down to less than 500 ppm fairly easily. So not a lot of power consumption. But let's ask the GA and the Navy if they're interested in long-term sustaining of our water supply. What can we do about things that are getting saltier all the time? Things that have gotten saltier recently, maybe, anyway, so that's my hold forth.
Yeah, but
which
that
I
is a
usually-
separate topic for another
Separate
time.
topic, that's what I usually do. I'm kind of, it makes me kind of sad that Sam left. I think, you know, we're discussing something that we understand we need, you know, answer to their question. But there are people in the valley who, you know, they've already got the problem. So, anyway.
Thanks.
Enough.
Don, do you have anything to add?
I have several things.
I was saying Don
Oh,
Zadiba.
okay.
So I'd like to finish with the committee members first. John, do you have anything to add? Camille, you've already, Tom?
I've spoken, you know, 4 meetings worth of speaking.
Oh. Okay, and everybody else I think has spoken. Go ahead, Don.
I-
Decker.
Yes, it's Decker. I probably should scold Judy a little bit. She claimed that I wasn't a water chemist, but actually I am. I worked for the Department of Agriculture for 4 years, doing all kinds of things, including water chemistry. She forgot.
I don't recall saying anything about you being a chemist or not. So there,
Okay. No family disagreements here.
Now,
yeah.
let me repeat something I said earlier. Virtually all of the well failures that we're going to see are going to be water level related, not water quality related. There are water haulers that have been hauling now for quite some time. Sam is hauling water because she doesn't have any water. There's no way to drill to water because of the hill that's, you know, the Rademacher Hill extends out under her property so shallow that by the time you would get to water, you're in solid rock. So she has no water. And there's a huge number of people that could live out there that have given up and moved or died off or whatever. So there's an area of the valley that has no water. The water chemistry aspect is primarily North Brown Road, and there are water haulers that are ignoring the GA completely, don't want to have anything to do with the GA, that have a well that has failed because of water quality, that are hauling water themselves. And all you have to do is go to Inyakern on any late afternoon and you'll see the trailers with water tanks that are stealing it from the Inyakern CSD or buying it from Herb's store. Or so there is water chemistry well failure, no question about it, but they have not applied for help, and nor will they. They detest, I think is the right word, the GA and what it's doing. The water level issue, however, is in a lot of ways it's simpler because it's it's a simple measurement to make in an open well, and you can track it in time, and it's easy enough to figure out what's happening. And that's why there's that emphasis in this report.
I understand.
The water chemistry could be added with, a lot of additional complexity, but we avoided it, as I've explained over and over. I think that's all I had to really provide
Thank
for
you.
you.
The third piece of the tasking that I was about to say was recommended terms required for clarified definition and any other adjustments to the mitigation program suggested by the tasking. And that was specifically which terms did we recommend, both within the policy itself and perhaps anything that we are recommending be added, changed, or clarified in the policy. And again, I would say I don't think the recommendation should take the form of a checklist. That should be the final checklist. It's a recommendation for things that should or could be supplied to increase, make yourself basically eligible. That's the threshold. And then what would increase your potential for additional mitigation monies beyond the bare minimum. And that's the format that as a lifelong engineer and manager that I would expect to see, and we've said we want to be clear, so there's a lot of really good information in this document, but I want to be sure when the PAC moves forward with the recommendation, it in fact, it's something that we can unanimously stand behind and is clear to all of us. And so
It seems that that's the exact opposite of what Camille suggested. She suggested, and so did Regina, basically an outline form.
And an outline or bullet form may in fact meet that need. Maybe I'm talking past you and vice versa.
I think you're getting them switched. So you had two different taskings. One would be that outline. The other one is the definitions, which are already pretty well done, where it's very well broken down. I mean, especially the one about changing the de minimis. That makes a lot of sense to me. So that part seems to be done to me already. The definition, the changes for verbiage or whatever, that part's done. The outline or breakdown of what the requirements would be, simplified, layman's terms. That part I'm still a little shaky on, and then the C&E portion for task 2. So it's just those first two pieces, the definitions are already done.
I don't recall any discussion at the last meeting, by that I mean the April meeting, of creating some sort of C&E plan for this document. First, this document has to be accepted.
It
by
wasn't,
the board.
it wasn't a plan. It had nothing to do with the document itself. It was based on what recommendations we might have moving forward. And let me read the tasking again. Recommended terms, I'm sorry. It was suggested by the tasking. Are there recommendations for communication and engagement opportunities that might be needed by things that we identify? So an example is what you yourself just stated with regards to in order to consider being eligible for this program, perhaps on the water quality level, all shallow well owners should be, although the state, the county keeps a copy of the records, should be aware of their water quality level by the documentation that we've suggested. And in the case that they're going to file based on declining water quality, they have a current report or state validate, state finding of your water isn't meeting the qualities, et cetera. It's what, if I'm a well owner in this valley, a shallow well owner, what might I be expected? What should I be doing? And what documentation should I pursue in going before a request for mitigation under the shallow well mitigation program?
Okay, you do understand that dealing with water quality is complicated. It will require, if that is the route that the well owner wishes to take, it will require lab samples over time.
And that could be, that's exactly what we want to clarify. If you're going to go down this route, you might be difficult to prove.
So taking this discussion in a little bit different direction with regard to eligibility, and I brought this up during the April meeting because it was a topic that was discussed by the Groundwater Authority to be eligible, and I'd be open to hearing what people think, but to be eligible, at one point it was considered that your well should be registered with the Groundwater Authority in order to be eligible.
That already is a requirement in the program.
In this revision?
No, in the program, the original program.
I don't believe it is.
I saw it. Let me see if I can find it. Go ahead.
I know it was suggested, but I believe it is in there?
Yeah, and I had to check to me. I didn't say anything last meeting when that statement was made because I thought it was in there, but I wasn't sure. But I printed out both documents.
It is in there? Okay.
And it is in there. And
Okay.
you saw it also. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that because I thought that was going to be an important recommendation.
Yeah, I know when it was really originally discussed, that was a recommendation, but I don't believe it was put in originally, so it must have been added. And
I think there was waffling on that, and so that may be why you and I didn't remember that.
Okay.
So is it?
I just have a question. I'm looking at the PAC report you gave at the May 10th meeting, where it lists the 3 tasks.
Yeah, and those were a summary of the final statement really at the end of the meeting last time that I said, do we all agree with this, that they should, the subcommittee should go forth, and these are the 3 primary things that they're looking at, because those were a summary grouping of the 3 major discussion points that surrounded what we discussed at length last time.
Okay, because, I'm looking at the second one. It says recommendations for communication and engagement opportunities that might be needed, potentially those that may not be within the GA authority. But does this also include how to communicate with well owners before their wells fail so they know what documentation to produce? Because to me, that should be part of that.
And that's exactly, it was intended, just like the third item, is to say, given that we think these are the reasonable expectations that the board should utilize in their consideration, these are the reasonable expectations that the well owners should have of what's going to be required of them. And therefore, the GA should communicate that prior to failure. So if you think you're experiencing any failure, or you even have a shallow well that has any issues at all, I would certainly want to know what, and I would expect them to communicate to me. You know, it's one thing to say the form's published and whatnot, but you didn't know you needed to have, you know, document A, B, or you didn't know you needed a well maintenance report or water quality report or whatever it is. I mean, we've talked about proactive communications many times, and that was and there were several of us last time that spoke about the need to be clear expectations. So the board's asking us for what do you recommend be considered, and for those recommendations, is there any consideration of communications with the public, specifically the shallow well folks?
That should, again, be in the policy and as an introduction to the form. Because, look, people are not going to, they're not going to look at this if they don't have a problem. I mean, do you pick up the owner's manual on your vehicle and read it every night before you go to bed? Come on now.
No, but I do read my vehicle owner's manual quite often to make sure I stay on track for all the maintenance. I mean, I
You
do
must
read
be
it
one in
ahead.
10,000, Renee.
Well, my car has over 230,000 miles on it.
And
It's still running well.
isn't it reasonable that, you know, the people that are paying into the GA, if we're going to pay out to people, that they should be able to prove that they're worthy of getting that money?
Let me give you an exact example. At least two of us on this panel up here, this committee, didn't realize that the current policy included well registration prior to our taking this issue on. Isn't that something we want to tell the public, all well owners? They don't have to listen. As we've seen before, people can make their choices. They have the freedom. But I would certainly think that we have the responsibility or the GA has the responsibility to get that information out there in at least some form. And thus, you know, if there's minimum acceptable things that are expected by well owners to provide, and, you know, they must be registered, but they must also get the well maintenance report, the current one that defines that they have an issue. That kind of thing.
I think you
it can be
should
very
quit
well.
calling it a maintenance report.
Well, that's what I was told it was called. It was a well maintenance function, but it's a report by a maintenance person.
Usually it's by the well driller who pulls your well.
But I was told, we were told that they're two separate things, the original driller's report and then a maintainer's report that may not be a driller. That's, whatever terminology is correct and inclusive, to use a term I don't like, in fact, is what we should have in the report. So I'll defer to the folks that are more knowledgeable about that.
Well evaluation report.
That's a better clarification.
I don't like that maintenance in there.
So well evaluation report, would that be recognized by all the?
That would be the guy that comes, pulls the pump and says, ooh, boy, you got a problem down
And
there.
so any shallow well owner would recognize that reference?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So,
And this is the kind of thing we're asking them to do.
so we're kind of going in circles now. We've
Yes,
come
we
full circle.
are.
Can I make a motion?
If we need to vote on it,
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
okay.
I mean, based on everything that I've heard, there's two pieces that are still left, which is just the basic checklist that, you know, some of us would like for clarification purposes. And then identifying some, because, I mean, we dealt with this earlier in the year, identifying some of the communication opportunities that could be taken if the subcommittee could go back and just review those two things. Because the definitions to me are very clear. They're very well laid out. So just those two things for the subcommittee to review, and then maybe we check in next month, if possible, if that's enough time.
Probably.
Now, just clarify what you mean by checklist, because I was thinking, and I would ask Camille the same question. It's a reorganization of the report and then a summary of, a bulletized summary of what the formal recommendations are.
Yes.
Not the changes necessarily, but the formal recommendations
points.
that might include recommended changes to the policy.
Yes, that's what I
Okay.
mean. So the bulletized version of this, that's just, very, boom, there it is. We understand the basics.
So
of-
Regina,
Oh.
you're making that motion. Is that
Yes.
motion clear?
I'll second it.
Okay, so Camille has seconded it.
Does that motion include a bullet form or list of the documentation required of the well owner?
It will include that,
Okay.
whether it's in the motion or not.
And then will
It
there
is in the
also,
motion.
will there also be like a list or some kind of glossary or something that will spell out the definitions? I've seen a lot of documents where they have the definitions listed in a definition part.
You're saying for clarity?
Yeah, so that people would automatically could turn to a certain page. I don't understand what this means, so they,
This isn't the actual policy, so I think at this time, that's not necessary of the subcommittee at all, because they've already broken down definitions pretty well within the document
Yeah.
themselves, and Julie even bolded them, which made it very helpful for me. So thank you. I appreciate it.
I would say, for full clarity, is there's two things. We originally tasked for considerations by the board in executing the policy, what documentation might be expected by well owners. And we've expanded that to include policy changes based on that. And so keep in mind, there are still those two different things. There may be recommendations for when in executing the policy that the GA consider, and then there's absolute changes that we think are necessary for clarification to the policy. And what I'm hearing is there are a few of those, and there are definitely definitions within the current policy that need to have defined. And in some cases, we're recommending adding two sections. Obviously, that's going to require a change to the policy.
If the board would do nothing else than agree that a shallow well meant a de minimis well, that would be a policy change right there.
And that could be.
Okay.
This committee has kind of supported the idea of a separate, not a separate policy, but a second half to the policy for shallow well collectives, if you will.
Well, I pointed this out to you at our last meeting, but I'll point it out again. One could have a shallow well that it had a casing size of 3 feet. Just think about the size of a pump and motor that could go in a 3-foot diameter shallow well. You want to consider that for mitigation? I don't, and I won't. So that's why the term shallow well needs to be defined, as well as well failure. And the well failure is clearly explained in the technical addendum.
Yeah, like I said, I think the definitions the subcommittee doesn't need to come back to. You guys did a fantastic job. So it's just those two pieces. It's the bullet point thing, like Judy was talking about already, and then identifying a few of the C&E opportunities that the GA could potentially take. And that's it. Just those two things for clarification for maybe next month, like I said.
Okay.
Any other comments? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? So it is unanimous. Okay.
If any of you have any really specific things you would like, y'all have my email address. You can try emailing me and we'll see if our wonderful internet service is working that day. What's next?
We're going to the item, and we got me out of order, so I've misplaced.
You're out of order, well, here you go.
No, I'm looking for
What you wrote,
my document. Yes, okay.
I have that
So
too.
what we're looking at now is 5A. Review the top-level draft and finalize PAC recommendation regarding consolidations under the shallow well program. And for full clarity, as stated at the end of the meeting last time, what I was going to summarize and present to you, and this is almost word for word, was a top-level statement of support that encouraging the GA consideration of proactive consolidations where feasible and cost-effective under state grants with potential modifiers and subject to review at this meeting. And that is the bolded portion of what was sent to the full PAC, so it's the second paragraph. And for clarity, I'll read that. The Policy Advisory Committee encourages the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority to consider, investigate, and execute proactive consolidations emphasized where such consolidations are. They meet three conditions, and these are the subject to conditions mentioned in the PAC report and at the end of our last meeting that I gleaned from our discussion, where they are A, most feasible and effective, B, cost-effective under state grants, and C, most cost-effective for all stakeholders across the basin in the administration of the shallow well mitigation program. And I see I didn't capitalize well in that last one. And so that's the statement. The non-bolded paragraph above were the summary of the facts brought out in the last PAC meeting that led to this about, shallow wells going dry, the agencies responsible for the mitigation, the agency that would have to execute if there were any considered, the fact that state grants are available potentially to cover full cost of any such mitigation. So that's all covered there. So the proposed draft statement is the bolded portion, paragraph 2. Are there any modifications proposed to that or clarifications?
Yeah,
Should it
This
not be clear enough?
consolidation thing.
I'm sorry?
This consolidation thing, seemed like last month Judy said that it should be up to the water district because they're the ones that can determine if it's cost effective, how hard it would be, and whether it makes sense and all of those things. That seems to be what I remember, and that seems to be, you don't quite say it. I thought you had.
Well, it's kind of summarized up above in the considerations and what it gets to, and I think this is the crux of, and I wrestled with myself on presenting the considerations first, and I sent this to the committee because it was meant to jog your brains and about what we discussed at the last meeting. That input was from Judy. There were other inputs in the meeting. It would jog your brains, and perhaps I went back and looked at the PAC meeting in total for 3 separate times. That's about 8 hours worth of looking at it. So what?
I have quite a few comments.
Let me
I have
finish
one, too.
answering Lyle's question.
I have one. Go ahead, you
moment.
go first.
So
Go first.
essentially, what I was trying to say in the non-bolded paragraph is and West specifically stated, to my recollection in the meeting last time, is that the Groundwater Authority is the one responsible and accountable for having any loss of water levels in the valley and/or water quality, any undesirable circumstance. That's one of the 6 conditions under SGMA, that requirement. So we have the Groundwater Authority is the responsible and, more importantly, the accountable agency. In 99% plus of the cases, the water district is the ones that would have to execute any, and they're, as members of this forum have stated many times, their ratepayers, of which I am one, are the ones paying 100% of the fees for such mitigation. That's a specifically called out component of the replenishment fee. So only those members of the Groundwater Authority that are paying the replenishment fee pay the mitigation costs. And so the water district, as a member of the Groundwater Authority, has a 1/5 responsibility under the GA for any negative consequences, but they have 100% responsibility for the financial execution should they choose to execute it. And I've stated it not explicitly because I'm not sure. They would have to be answered to their financial responsibilities under their charter, their state regulatory board, for any negative costs incurred in that. But the study would value or would study the cost effectiveness given state grant, and that's item number B. Is it more cost effective for the water district and its ratepayers, and as a part of the GA, which is responsible overall, to mitigate to allow I'm not saying this clearly, to pay the costs of mitigation without any potential for state grant of such, if such one might have been, if considered ahead of time, might have been effective in zeroing the cost to the water district by use of state grants. So it essentially is saying, should we minimize the costs to the residents of the valley, of 99% right now, of which are the water district ratepayers, by proposing that the Groundwater Authority, which with the water district, and the water district may very well be the performing agency, they go out and examine it, and they only consider this, it makes logical sense to me, where most feasible and effective. So it would be effective in eliminating the problem or mitigating the problem. Cost effective under state grants. So it's cost effective under state grants. In other words, the
We got your
ratepayers
point.
would bear less cost than a mitigation cost, and most effective for all stakeholders across the basin in the administration of the shallow well program, because we got two of the 5 agencies involved, the one accountable, the Groundwater Authority, and the one that would bear the execution cost. And when not stated here was the fact that any mitigation that they did do would in fact, and that was pointed out in the documentation last time, any mitigation they would be done under the consolidation in addition to being paid for if they were eligible, and if that well or group of wells were eligible under the allocation plan, they would pick up the allocation of non-fee water into the water district.
Mr. Janik, can the rest of us have an opportunity?
Now that I've answered his question, yes.
All right. Number 1, the policy, the GSP talks about 22 wells. It doesn't say where the wells are. It doesn't say if they're close to one another. The first thing you mention is the water district. The water district has its own rules and regulations. It was created by legislation and a vote of the people. Any kind of consolidation with the water district is between the entity that wants to be consolidated and the water district. It is not with the GA board. If the GA board wants to get involved with this, they need to speak to the water district, not the PAC. It needs to be a direct communication between those two agencies. When an agency, when a well fails or a community well fails and they go to the water district, it's a deal between them and the water district. How it's been in the past is that entity pays for their infrastructure to put in proper size pipelines and laterals and meters and connect to the water district. I do not see that this committee has any business discussing this.
What was stated merely recommends exactly that, amplified by the fact that the water district is one of the 5 members.
I also would like to point out that most probably wells that will fail in the next 15 years or so, because I believe the report says 2040, are probably going to be wells that are somewhere way up along North Brown Road somewhere. I would also like to point out to you, all of you, that the county continues to permit wells and property in areas of known poor water quality. There's a section that is already within water district boundaries. The parcels are 5 acres. They have their own wells. The water for years and years and years has been known to be high in arsenic. They continue to build houses there. I don't know if they're drinking the water. I don't think the state or the water district or the GA should have to mitigate anything like that.
To use Tim's phrase, may I take court or hold court?
Absolutely.
Okay. Just to clarify, I thought I heard you say something that maybe I misheard it, but are you saying that the water district customers are paying obviously the replenishment fee, which part of that goes towards the mitigation fund? Were you thinking that those funds that are in the mitigation would go towards the consolidation of a water mutual?
No, I'm saying that if you were to study the potential wells that might be among those 22, and you determined that also, boy, they might fit in for consolidation, you could lead turn, that's an aviation term, you could obviate their failure and expense to the GA and to the water district ratepayers if you got a state grant to consolidate them in. That's merely the proposal.
So to be clear, we're not using the well mitigation funds for any consolidation at all?
Not as written, and I don't even know if that would be legal.
So then my second point, statement number 2, the Indian Wells Valley Water District is the probable water provider responsible and accountable for executing consolidations and must bear the costs required for any consolidation undertaken. To be clear, the water district would not be responsible for that. As Judy pointed out, there are 2 options, either state grants or to form an assessment district. The cost for a mutual or co-op to be absorbed by the water district would fall on the customers of, not on the district customers, but the customers of that system that is wanting to be absorbed into the district.
Thank you, Don. That's exactly the words that help clarify this, that I wasn't sure we recommended last time essentially the first statement, but we said there would be modifying clauses to that. I proposed 3 modified clauses based on what we heard. That statement makes it very much more clear how the statement should be worded and clarified with regards to what the accountability is and who bears the costs and subject to the approval. And
Right. So if there are no state grants available and there are 10 customers on that well, those 10 customers bear the entire cost for any infrastructure that's required to put that system into the water district system.
And that would
Water
avoid-
district customers are not responsible for that.
yeah, I agree. And what they are responsible for, your water district customers, are paying the mitigation costs if that existed and the groundwater authority working with the water district didn't do that solution. So if that's the main concern with this, I very much support changing the wording to be absolutely correct. Because it's, as I tried to say, and it's the end of the evening, so I'm having some issues, we're merely trying to have the lowest cost to those in the valley for these mitigations. And it turns out that since the mitigations, if they had to be executed, are primarily paid for by the water district customers, we'd like to do it that way as opposed to paying twice.
What are you going to do if the wells that need to be consolidated are up on North Brown Road?
They wouldn't be cost effective. Those 3 cases, I tried to summarize the concerns and statements that we had made in this PAC that would protect the water district and the ratepayers. But we're merely encouraging the GA to take a look at these, and then we're saying only if they're cost effective, only if they're cost effective for the whole basin, and really under state grants. That's the main one, and the state grants can be 100%. So it's given, if I were an individual, given the ability to have funds to do some preventive maintenance on something that I knew was going to go bad, within the time frame that I'm looking at, in our case, the GSP and establishing sustainability, would I rather wait for the crisis and be forced to pay a fee out of my pocket, or would I rather get the subsidy to do it myself?
I have a question.
At
And
no
this might
cost.
sound weird because I know I missed some stuff. So if I'm understanding correctly, correct me please if I'm wrong, this consolidation pertains to community wells with 4 or more users. And it's in the shallow well mitigation program.
Don, is that true with regards to the state policy?
I need clarification.
Well, no, that's good, because we didn't get that exactly fully clarified within the state grant opportunities. Is it eligible for only those ones that she mentioned? Because we know the state
For
policy is
municipals and
encouraging.
co-ops.
I'm sorry?
Municipals and co-ops versus a single well? Is that what you're
Yeah,
asking?
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, is
Yeah.
this applies to municipal or whatever, community co-op? Yeah, mutuals.
Mutuals and
Yes.
co-ops, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that, so it's 4 or more?
Well, it's anything that would be eligible for state grant under consolidation.
Well, okay, so we have one definition that we already went over. We have wells that are 2 or less, and then we have wells, shallow wells, that are more than 2 that do not count as de minimis per our new definition.
Well,
4.
this isn't-
Sorry, 4.
This has nothing to do with de minimis. It is what wells would qualify, wells or small systems would qualify under
Okay.
the state grant program.
So, and that's why I'm asking, because Judy's made a couple of points. I'm clarifying in my mind as to how this works. So this policy applies to co-ops or small mutuals with 4 or more users attached to the well.
It's whatever is in the state policy to be eligible for a state grant.
Right.
And we have no control over that definition. It's whatever the state defines it as.
So I think we need clarification there then as to what
Not
That
if we
may
don't-
be.
if we
Because
don't
if
say
it's,
it.
if the state grants are only allowed for systems with 4 or more users on the shallow well, then this entire thing becomes a moot point, because based on the recommendations from the subcommittee, those wells would not be eligible.
Well, that's, and perhaps.
per the new recommendations.
Under the, yes, and that, as written currently, remember, we're adding a second section to it for collectives. And in fact, we could take out the words that reference the mitigation. Essentially, it's any well in the valley is subject to mitigation, shallow well in the valley, not defined as de minimis. Any shallow well in the valley, as I understand it, and I think we were briefed on this, can pursue the mitigation under the Groundwater Authority's shallow well program. And SGMA clearly states that any negative consequence the groundwater authorities are GSAs are responsible for. So if there needs to be clarification on that issue, I agree. But the concept is we're simply, and this, I think Camille proposed the first wording that we then had slightly modified by other inputs. You're grinning, Camille. It was a top level
Yeah,
encourages.
I don't remember exactly the conversation that we had last time. I should go back and look at the
Well,
video. But I do like the bold statement. My concern is actually the two, given that numbers 1 and 2 above.
They were not intended to be a part of the statement, but merely reflecting, the conversation.
And if in this statement you wanted to say something with the groundwater authority to consider, investigate, and execute proactive consolidations in consultation with the water district or something like that, where such consolidations meet the following conditions, I'm okay with that too. That would be something to ask Dawn. If you took out the two statements above number 1 and 2, the standalone in bold, do you think we need to mention working with the water district? Since it is actually a water district function.
Anything that add clarity, I would think would be preferred.
I still don't understand why we are dealing with this.
I think we're dealing with this because the state is giving grants for consolidation of water systems. And so in order to get money for that type of thing, we're encouraging the groundwater authority to pursue that.
Well, we can do that as individuals. I don't see why the policy advisory committee is involved in it. We aren't creating a policy.
We were asked to consider a policy recommendation with regards to consolidations.
Isn't this, the reason why we're discussing this is because we would save the GA money if they didn't have to mitigate a shallow well, if it was eligible for the state grant, that the shallow well, co-op, mutual, small mutual or whatever.
And by virtue of the fact that...
Then we would save, why pay out this money to mitigate their well when they could be covered by a state grant and not have future wells to have to deal with?
Yeah, and the Groundwater Authority is, by SGMA, required to bear the brunt of the cost. And the only agency, the delivery agency in the valley is the Water District. And so we're encouraging the Groundwater Authority, of which the Water District is a part of, in coordination with, I didn't think it was necessary to state that because they're the ones that would get the state grants, that in coordination with them, we explore this. And only where feasible and cost-effective under state grants and best for all the stakeholders in the valley, and that's where we're bringing in the accountability of the Groundwater Authority to pay out the mitigation and the ability and accountability of the water district to look or to get state grants and do the mitigation free,
I
essentially.
suggest you reword the first bold sentence to say, the Policy Advisory Committee encourages the Groundwater Authority to consult and advise the water district with regard to well consolidation and grant availability.
I'm not sure it's necessary because as you pointed out, the water district is a member of the groundwater authority. So I'm not sure you have to be redundant and say they have to consult the water district when they're already a member.
That's why I
Well,
didn't say
But
it.
it would, I mean, my understanding, if you're consulting, that would be consulting the entire board of the water district, not just the sitting member of the water district. So that would just change the little bit of verbiage that it would need to go through the full board, not just through
Well,
their
that
sitting
member represents the board.
Yeah, I don't think there's a difference, practically speaking. Is there, Don?
I would agree. I think we're getting too deep into this unnecessarily.
And this was my fear in writing it, was how, we don't typically like to get detailed, but how I could have made this explicitly clear if I had a full page, perhaps not.
I have one question before you go to the public. This was brought up last meeting by a member of the public. Are the consolidation grant funds available through the state only available to the water district, or does the GA have access?
My understanding, I think we talked about this last time, but we didn't have somebody, a legal person sitting on the table or with the committee, is that the water district is the one that has to request the grant. And as if they've studied it and said, hey, if we get 100% grant, this is cost feasible.
Well, it's actually the water system that wants to consolidate has to make the
Okay.
request. And then
Thank
it
you,
comes to the
Don.
water district and they say, can you take this system on?
And that's part of the investigation.
Yeah.
And that's why we use the investigate, consider, investigate, and execute only if feasible, cost-effective, et cetera.
Right. In both situations that the water district is working on now in conjunction with Dune 3 and Hometown, both those systems approached the state with the need to consolidate. And then when the district was approached by the state, said, can you take them on? We have to look at the feasibility of doing that, what the costs would be, and then go forward with trying to secure the grant funding.
So out of curiosity, did they, with regards to the process, did they approach you first and you said, no, you have to go to the state?
In the case of Hometown, I believe they did come to the water district first and ask if we could take them on. Dune 3, I believe, went to the state first. That's my recollection.
But in either case, they don't have the ability to go to the groundwater authority. I don't think the groundwater authority plays a role in this process statutorily. Is that correct or not?
I'm not sure. Again, the way it has worked is that the mutual, the co-op that wants to consolidate approaches the state approaches the water district. I don't know that they would go to the groundwater authority first. I think they would come to the water district because we're the ones that they're requesting to.
What we're trying to do, I think, is we're trying to do two things. We're trying to make sure that the groundwater authority can't direct the water district to do something, and there's no way, as we understand it in the existing law, they could do it. But we're recommending they only consider encouraging under all these following conditions that are safety guards for all the GA and specifically water district and water district ratepayers. Any other inputs?
Dave, I'm sorry, this is Carol. I just wanted to add something before you got too far off of what you were talking about.
Yes. Yes, Carol.
just to clarify, the consolidation process, it does not have to be initiated by the water system that wants to be consolidated. It can be initiated by, I think, a government entity that has jurisdiction, such as the county water, for instance, or the water boards. Especially if the system is out of compliance and is not able to come into compliance on various issues, the state can come in and initiate proceedings, or there's other vehicles that can result in the same thing. It doesn't have to be that the water system says, okay, we want to approach somebody to be taken over. It may sometimes I've seen where LAFCO have done studies and determined that systems needed to be consolidated and made those recommendations to initiate the proceedings. So there's different ways that it can happen, and it doesn't have to be that the water system that has the issues has to initiate it.
Thank you, Carol. But a point of clarity with, I think, what this committee is concerned with, protecting the water district. It's one of their concerns that we would protect the water district and the ratepayers from unilateral action by the GA, which is itself an agency. Would it be included in that statement, or does it have to be a regulatory or provider entity that would initiate that action?
No, I don't see why the Groundwater Authority wouldn't have the ability to prompt it. It doesn't mean that we would have the authority to make it happen, but we could request. We could go to the water board, for instance, and request that begin to happen. And so it doesn't mean that only the water district can do it, or only the system that needs to be consolidated can do it. And as you've been talking about, the reason that you're considering this is because of the cost implications to the Groundwater Authority to do shallow well mitigation versus having shallow well systems being pulled into larger water systems that don't have those issues.
Thank you. Other members of the committee, before we go to the public?
No, I just wanted to say, Carol's right. I should have clarified that. There are situations where water systems are out of compliance, and the state would want to encourage consolidation with the water district. I think the point I was trying to make is the water district generally doesn't go out and actively try to consolidate a system unless they request to be consolidated with the water district. That was the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, and so that may require some clarification within the statement. Any other input from committee members?
I have a question for Carol, actually. During the last meeting, I thought I heard that we recently received a grant that had to do with consolidation. Am I misunderstanding? Maybe we were looking to apply for a grant for consolidation, but I thought there was some discussion about that. Am I incorrect?
No, you're absolutely correct. I did announce that at the last meeting that we had applied for and received a $3.3 million grant for consolidation projects, and it's under the Urban Communities Drought Resiliency. I forget the name of it, but that was similar to the name of the program. And yes, this is specifically to assist with consolidation programs. So I think we have yet to, identify how exactly we want to carry that out. But we do have that money now that we can put towards those consolidation efforts.
So as written, Carol, would this policy statement allow the use potentially of that grant money to either do studies, feasibility study itself, or to augment any shortfall in a specific state grant in executing consolidation should improve or to help it aid in being cost effective?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the work plan to see if the feasibility studies were part of it. I would assume so. I don't know that you'd want to go forward without that. And I think it may be that it's not necessarily intended to augment, but be done in place of other state grants.
Thank you. Any other member? Public comment from in the room, please?
Ron Kosinski, thank you. I didn't think you'd ever get to me. You know, it
been
just
brief.
it seems like you go back and forth, and you really complicate this matter. I mean, it's not a simple matter, but it is complicated. First of all, let's talk about mitigation. As I see it, there's two types of mitigation. One is you either go deep in a well, and because they've had a water level drop, or for some reason you're going to have to consolidate it because more than likely it's a quality issue. Okay, so mitigation is those type of things. There's three types of well systems. There's a de minimis well for an individual user, and there's still a de minimis well for a co-op, which is 4 users. Okay, then anytime you get above 4 users, 5 or above, you now get into a small water system or a mutual. Those are regulated by the state. They have to turn in reports, quality reports. Those are ones Don mentioned. The state might see that they're not meeting their requirements, and they're going to say, you need to do something, the mutuals. So those are the 3 definitions. And I haven't heard that here yet. I keep hearing confusion about which group is which group. Now, I also understand that what you're concerned with is the de minimis users, not the mutuals. So you're looking at mutuals and every well system out here.
Shallow wells.
Okay, shallow wells. But okay, so if you're telling me that if a mutual system that has 40 hookups has a well issue, that falls under the purview of the GA. I don't understand it that way.
The accountability for any mitigation under Sigma falls under the GA.
For mutuals, for small water systems.
For shallow well
okay.
implications
Well, I'm not,
caused by...
There's where we're getting confused. Because, for instance, if Inyakern has a shallow well problem, okay, but they're a water system, are they eligible for money from the GA? Would the water district be eligible?
They would have to show that, they would have to meet the requirements to show that the damage was due to the lowering water table, not to something.
I haven't seen that in anything the GA's written. My understanding is the GA is to mitigate the issue with de minimis wells, and de minimis wells includes co-ops, which incidentally Judy knows this. Co-ops grew out of 4 2.5-acre parcels, and they put 1 well in the middle and serve 4 of them. So those are the ones that I thought that you were mitigating. I didn't think that your mitigation grew into water systems or domestic water suppliers.
The de minimis wells are not specifically mentioned in the current shallow well mitigation
Right.
program, so there is no consideration for that. It is not just de minimis wells under Sigma. It's the Sigma requirements for what the GA is accountable for.
Right,
And we're suggesting modifying the existing de minimis, shallow well program to include definitions for the different cases to address the exact
Yeah,
issue you talk about.
yeah.
De minimis on one account, and I referred to them as collectives, but
Your
mutual.
collectives, cooperatives,
Yes.
which are not mutual. Don't say mutual.
Yeah,
because
but
a
there
mutual
would
well
be,
system
they
is a
would be
water
eligible,
system.
according to Sigma. We're subdividing a Sigma definition of well
I
negative.
haven't seen that definition in our plan.
Any well that goes dry, anybody that can show.
Any well that goes dry. So,
No, any well that goes dry and
Because-
can be shown to be an effect of the continued overdraft in the basin. That's, I think, the language in Sigma.
yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that. I have a hard time believing that you would go to a system that is, quite a few users on it, not nearly as high as the water district, and that you would help mitigate a shallow well issue that they had, if they had a shallow well. But anyway, let's just move on from there because we're again complicating it. To me, you've got 3 types of systems you're dealing with. A de minimis individual well, and they still consider a de minimis a cooperative. Unless there's somebody on there using agricultural reasons or something like that. So to me, that's fairly simple. And then Judy made a point. If you're going to start wanting to consolidate the larger mutuals, that's one issue. okay, because and they're more than likely eligible to the state for bigger grants and all that. But if you want to start consolidating, let's say, a co-op that sits somewhere way out in Inyakern, I can tell you that $3.3 million isn't going to go very far. When you start talking about because of the distance, and anybody who deals with water piping and consolidation, and Judy mentioned most of those wells that you might have to mitigate because of quality issues might be quite a distance away from hooking up to anything that has to do with the water district. So just keep in mind the $3.3 million for the consolidation. I'm not sure how far that would go and how you identified it, where it would go. But I just think that this group sometimes gets a bit off track because of the definitions that they seem to be going all over the place with the definitions. And Don's right and Carol's right. Anybody can initiate. The state has always encouraged consolidation for small water systems that have available larger water companies to hook into. I don't know if they would do a cooperative for sure. I'd never seen a cooperative that applied for a grant or anything like that from the state, but it may be possible. So it just seems like we get off track and we got definitions going all over the place. And I think it's easy to narrow it down into the two types of mitigation, whether you're going to have to deepen a well or you're going to have to consolidate. And then from there you have to say, okay, which wells do we consider? De minimis, which I consider, de minimis I call a single user well. In a co-op, up to four people are on one well. And then you've got the water systems. And I think that needs to be identified. Because I've been involved with the GSP, and I've seen, I just don't recall in there where they're going to, where large water systems or mutuals can go to the GA and say, by the way, I have a well issue, and I want to apply for money. Because typically, though, I think most of those wells are probably deeper, but some aren't. There's some mutuals out there that don't have really deep wells that still exist.
And wouldn't that be covered under the investigate and cost-effective?
It would, yeah, but
I mean,
who would initiate?
We're trying to keep it as simple as possible.
Who initiates
It must be
that?
cost-effective.
I think I agree with Judy that when you talk about consolidation, that should be initiated by whoever that cooperative is, or the individual well owner, or the mutual.
Ron, if you recall back in the old days, when the GEA first got going, TAC was, and PAC was too, heavily involved in creating the shallow well mitigation policy. And what the two committees declared to be a proper policy is not what was adopted.
Yeah.
It was totally changed. And so you have this confusion in that document. And you start with the confusion of what's a shallow well.
You guys have the opportunity to make recommendations to clean that up. And you've all said it before, it needs to be cleaned up.
And we did that.
Yeah, and I think that's going to continue to take some work because a lot of definitions to be made and who qualifies and who doesn't. And I don't see any place I can just go, do I qualify? And under what conditions do I qualify? And like I said, the only thing I'm not sure of is those cut grants. And Don, I don't know if the water district's ever been asked to consolidate a mutual. Unless the only thing I can think of that happened might be in the Judy back there where I live on the South Downs area. That was all individual wells and cooperatives, and then it went to one of the older water systems. And they went ahead and did assessments to put that system in and put everybody on the water district.
I think the Stark system, I think the Stark system was a mutual. It was a collection of small wells, boiler pipe from Trona that had been laid down years before, that as the dirt roads eroded, the pipe now was, well, you drove over it in the upper levels. The state came to the water district and asked them to take it over because they, if you recall, had so many complaints because they didn't have any tanks of any size. And in the summertime, when the people who lived up at the higher elevations all turned on their sprinklers in their coolers, or rather the people at the lower elevations did that, the people at the higher elevations didn't have any water.
The system that
And
went in.
they paid a flat rate.
The system that went in, it replaced the Stark Mutual, if you would call it, plus it picked up a lot of the co-ops as well that are out there. But keep in mind, I don't know how much state grant money was granted out there because all that was done on an assessment for a 20-year assessment. It was $2,000 to $3,000 per parcel per year for every parcel out there. It was a lot of money. Anyway, thank you. That's all I
The
have.
water district got a couple of low-interest loans, but no grants.
I would ask if we could bring this discussion to a conclusion. We're coming up on 3 hours for one agenda item, which seems, I think we're going back and forth and back and forth.
We're on the second one. It's been less than an hour, actually. But yeah, and that's why I wanted to do it first. But we have we have a public comment, and then we'll entertain public, and then we'll bring it to a conclusion.
I have a question. The idea of combining various water systems assumes that we actually have the water that's going to be involved. The way they are now, they're small wells and are scattered around. If the water district takes them over, it will be more centralized for efficiency. But the water district's pumped areas are heavily overdrafted. We're in a critically overdrafted basin. How in the world can you start shifting water around without considering where the water is coming from? This is really a question for higher level than this committee. I understand that. But I'm asking it in a public forum that will perhaps get more attention than it otherwise would get. I've actually asked it before the board before, the GA board, and it gets no response, naturally.
And it'll be summarized in our PAC report.
I thank you.
But it is, and it could be very much so, a part of the investigate piece of it.
Well, it certainly is an area to be investigated. There is no doubt about it. With a finite amount of water, any water that you additionally use for new apartments and houses and whatnot is being pulled out of the water that we all thought we had that we're using now. There is no new water.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
We have no imported water either.
Any comments from virtual land? None seen? Okay, with that, how do we want to?
No. That's green, not red.
You got one, I'm sorry. Very good. Caller, please state your name.
Yes, this is Wes Katzenstein. How you guys doing?
Pretty good. How come you didn't join in during your topic?
Well, I've been on hold since 5 o'clock.
Go ahead, I'm just teasing you. For clarification for the public, Wes Katzenstein is a member of the PAC out of the area right now, so he's not a voting member of the PAC for the purposes of this board.
Yeah, for the future, it'd be nice if I could be kind of the equivalent of Carol, or if somebody like myself is out of town. Just a couple of brief comments on this. I think all of this discussion is predicated on the fact that we're not collecting fees right now from anybody but the water district. And in principle, I'm hoping after the adjudication is done, we will be collecting fees. So throw that in as a little bit of background. If you go back to SGMA, the Groundwater Authority is responsible for precluding any undesirable results. And here we're talking about whether we're being cost effective or not, with the idea that we may abandon large groups of wells or people whose wells might fail because the groundwater level dropped too low since the GSP was signed, or the water quality got too bad since the GSP was signed. So I'm suggesting we proceed as if it is the responsibility of the Groundwater Authority to do this consolidation, and recognizing that the fact that the water district is the only institution paying right now, hopefully that will be temporary. Otherwise, we're making excuses for abandoning large numbers of people for allowing undesirable results, and that would, in my mind, be a failure of the Groundwater Authority. Once again, that's if these undesirable results happen due to groundwater level lowering or quality lowering. So I'm suggesting that, and I think you kind of hinted at it, Dave, when you first started, I believe it would be a failure of the Groundwater Authority if we failed to remediate wells with more than 4 people on them, and it would be a failure of the GSP. So I'm thinking the policy should be based more on the assumption that there will be fees that we can collect in the future and proceed that way. And this idea of finding grants, of course, is an excellent idea and should be pursued. But I don't want us to be using language that would have us, the Groundwater Authority, fail by not taking care of some significant undesirable results that would otherwise occur. So those were my thoughts I wanted to throw in.
I agree with you, West, and I tried to capture those thoughts that you expressed, and a couple others did, during the last meeting by item number C, that they must be most cost-effective for all stakeholders across the basin in the administration of the program that the GA is accountable for. That was intended to cover it, but didn't explicitly state that. When I was asked to explain what I said, or why the statement was written as written regarding the water district customers and ratepayers, is because that's the current situation, and I believe there was a misunderstanding about it's really about what's most cost effective for the ratepayers and cost effective for all stakeholders. But that's specifically. That second issue was why C, the third mitigating criteria, is appended to the basic one-sentence statement.
Well, I see that maybe as a temporary measure, but the policy should address the concept that we hopefully will be collecting fees from Big Ag and from other folks that should be paying fees, and those fees should pay for any remediation or mitigation that occurs. I think this cost effective is a temporary measure, recognizing that right now the water district is the only organization that's paying.
Wouldn't the statement be cost effective for the whole stakeholder, or for the valley stakeholders? You'd still want to pay out only for what is most cost effective for the stakeholders overall, given the absolute requirement for accountability under SGMA.
Well, you're talking now assuming we were collecting fees from ag and others.
Well, the GSP states that, and in court we're requesting, I believe, the Groundwater Authority is currently requesting the judge to force the non-payment to pay. Okay, so when you say most cost-effective, you're not saying we would abandon some wells. You're just saying we would guaranteed fix the problem, but we would do it in the most cost-effective way. Of course, yeah. I mean, that's implied in it. This essentially is saying, hey, guys, there's state grants out there. Take a look proactively and see what areas we can mitigate that are most likely to go dry and or bad quality, which is much harder to prove. But they would, and therefore it would not be cost under state grants where available. It would not cost any of the stakeholders. It's not exclusive.
Right.
It will cost stakeholders because it's going to cost stakeholders their water.
Are we saying we would abandon some people's homes and their wells?
No.
No.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
No, we're just saying that it wouldn't be under this consolidation. There's got to be different ways for accounting for those people. If we have to pay them, if the GA, of which we are a appointed committee, decides that, or if a well can be shown to be affected by the chronic lowering of the table before the basin is brought into sustainability, the GA is still accountable for it.
But
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
there's no other source of water except water district water. And the more customers the water district has to serve, the greater the use and depletion of groundwater.
Yeah, I think we all understand that.
I
And
don't
that's
think
why
we
I
all
think-
accept it.
That's why I think that ultimately, if we can't get grants, it should be paid by fees by the people who are using the water.
Thank you, West.
Okay. Anyway, it's been great listening to you guys, and I was prepared to participate, but we never really went to public comment till now. So I will put myself back on hold, and but in case you want me to spout off some more.
We appreciate you calling in, but now that we know you're online, you might get some tasking.
Okay.
You did get some tasking, so come back.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be back.
Thank you, West. Don, do you have any comments from the room?
Yes, I have one last comment. You folks here may not realize this, but there are more than a few shallow agricultural wells that are large diameter that could be sucked into this shallow well mediation business, and you would be dumbfounded when you saw what was coming in. There's more than just a few.
That's part of the investigate and analyze.
I can tell you where they are. It's basically Lee Lighter north on Brown Road, 400 feet. There are lots of shallow wells that are domestic, that are deeper, actually. The reason it's 400 feet is at that point you hit the organic clay layer that's the leftover from the playa days, that's huge, that underlies our basin. And once you get to that clay layer, your water is basically seawater. That's what killed off Connie Neal's great alfalfa fields.
Thank you. Any other comments from virtual land? So I'm seeing no properly. I think I can tell this time the difference between red and white. So with that, trying to bring this to a closure, do we have an additional comments or recommendations or a motion?
I move
regarding-
to approve it with the caveat that when we have, based on some of the subcommittee stuff, there may be possible clarifications and changes in the near future that may need to be looked at. But as it reads with the current policy as it stands, I move that we go ahead and approve it.
So that is for clarity as to what you're moving, is it's the bolded statement only.
Yes.
But it would not be formally approved or reported as a final statement at this meeting, out of this meeting. It would be pending the consideration and acceptance or a finalization of the subcommittee report at our next meeting.
Yes,
Is that
if there's
correct?
any clarifications or things that may impact this that come out of the subcommittee, because they're working on some very similar things. So I would hate to step and tell them no right out the gate. So approving it as is, as a draft, pending subcommittee's closure.
Pending.
This
Okay, so-
is not part of the subcommittee report.
Yeah, that's what I thought. This is separate.
There's
This is from Mr. Janik.
what I mean by that is there are some definitions within the subcommittee's report that may impact this. So before we move ahead and make it a full-blown thing, if anything comes out of the subcommittee that may potentially impact the consolidation as it is currently written in the policy, I would hate to go ahead and put this in there if the subcommittee's work and definitions are going to impact it, and then we got to come all the way back to this. So approving it as is, as a draft, pending subcommittee finalizing their stuff, and if there's nothing that impacts it at that point, then approve it as is.
The
that makes
policy as proposed is written general enough to to cover anything the subcommittee might propose, I would suspect, but others can weigh in. And I don't see any reason not to, other than a delay in a month, not to wait. But if it's not necessary, it's not necessary. If it is necessary, fine. So do we have any other comments or a second?
I have a question. I just want to know, will the GA need like examples of what you're meaning on A, B, and C?
I think anything more we add to it just muddies the water rather than clarifies.
Okay, because I know there were examples given at the last meeting. People brought up things that might fit under each one of those. And I don't know if the GA is going to know that.
Other comments?
I have a comment.
Yes, Judy.
West Katzenstein has a lot of vacations coming up, and it's unclear at this time whether we will be ready for a July meeting based on his availability for our part of this.
So given that consideration, you're saying it could potentially be more of a delay
Right.
to wait for the committee output. And given that combined with the foresight that there might, I don't see the possibility, but maybe you can more clearly see a possibility of modification that the committee might make that would affect this. It's written generally enough to comprehensively at the same time enough to include all the potential options that we've outlined tonight, I think, for the subcommittee.
Then that makes sense to me based on the explanations from everybody thus far. Then I move to approve it as is.
Any other comments? Second. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Discussion further? Okay, all in favor, and I sense we're going to have to go down the line and do a voice vote on this one, so I'll start with Regina.
Aye.
Renee?
Aye.
Oh, don't forget how.
I'm sorry.
I'm abstaining anyway.
I looked right, I saw the two guys in blue shirts and I conflated you.
Tim Carroll.
You're abstaining.
Abstaining.
And Renee's a yes, Regina's a yes, Lyle.
Yes.
Camille,
Yes.
Judy,
No.
and I vote yes. So it passes with the majority, and we have a 5-1 vote with an abstention. Okay, with that, we'll move to closing member comments, and I'll start, I started with you last time, didn't I, Tim?
No comment.
Oh, no comment. All right, we'll continue. Don?
No comment, thank you.
No
Regina?
comment, thank you.
No comment other than to thank the subcommittee for all their work on the
I have nothing further.
report. Thank you.
No comment.
John? Yeah. Tom?
Nothing.
Camille?
Nothing.
No comment.
Okay, my only final comment would be to thank the committee for their dedication on this issue. Obviously, it's controversial and important, I really think, and it's exactly the kind of thing that I'm pleased the PAC was asked to take on. And there is a future commitment to that, as most of our committees have gone back a couple times before we develop a final product for the full group. So thank you, and thank you for the 2/3 of our audience that was dedicated enough to continue with us, although you don't count because you're a semi-member today, Don. So with that, I'll adjourn, and thank you very much, everybody, for your involvement.